Hello, everyone. I hope you will support the discussion in the comments and tell me what you would do if you found yourself in the situations I am going to talk about today. I've owned a quiet little piece of farmland for years, passed down from my grandfather. It's not massive, but it's mine. A couple of acres with a barn and a field where I grow a few crops every year. I don't live there full time, but I've always kept it in good condition. It's peaceful, and I'd plan to retire there someday. 5 months ago, I had to leave for another city to help my sister, Amanda, who was recovering from surgery. She lives alone, so I took a leave from my job to stay with her and handle errands. Before leaving, I checked everything on the farm, locked up the barn, secured the gate, and even notified a trusted neighbor, Jeremy, that I'd be away for a while. Jeremy's been living next door for 20 years, and I'd always thought of him as a decent guy. We weren't close, but we exchanged holiday cards and helped each other out when needed. About 3 months into my stay with Amanda, I got a call from another neighbor, Carla, who lives down the road from my property. Carla sounded hesitant but told me I should come back as soon as possible because something strange was happening on my land. When I pressed for details, she said, "Jeremy's building something there." I thought she must be mistaken. Jeremy wouldn't do something so outrageous. I made arrangements to return sooner than planned, but it still took me 2 weeks to wrap things up. The whole time, Carla kept me updated. She sent me photos of a small house being built right in the middle of my field. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just some misunderstanding. Jeremy was constructing an actual house on my land. When I finally got back and saw it for myself, I was furious. The house wasn't finished, but it was already taking shape. Walls up, a roof being installed, and a truck parked in my field with tools and building materials scattered around. I marched straight to Jeremy's house and knocked on the door. He answered with a smug look, as if he'd been expecting me. "What the hell is this, Jeremy?" I asked, pointing toward my property. He didn't flinch. "Oh, that? Well, you've been gone for months and the land was just sitting there. I figured I could put it to better use." I couldn't believe his audacity. "That's my land. You don't get to put it to better use. Take it down now." Jeremy crossed his arms. "Actually, I checked the records. You haven't done anything substantial with that land for years. In this state, if someone improves an unused property, they can claim it. It's called adverse possession." I was stunned. First, that he thought this nonsense applied, and second, that he was bold enough to try it. I left before I said something I'd regret, but I immediately called my lawyer. She confirmed that Jeremy's argument didn't hold water. Adverse possession laws don't apply to land actively maintained by the owner, and I had the records to prove my ongoing care. The next day, I filed a police report for trespassing and property damage, along with a civil lawsuit to force him to demolish the house and pay for damages. Jeremy wasn't as confident once the police got involved. He tried arguing that he'd invested time and money into the construction and claimed I had abandoned the land. But the evidence was all on my side. During the investigation, it turned out Jeremy had forged a fake lease agreement to show that I had allowed him to use the property. That was the nail in his coffin. The forgery elevated the case to criminal fraud. In court, Jeremy tried to play the victim, saying he'd sunk all his savings into building the house and had nowhere else to go. But the judge wasn't buying it. He was ordered to tear down the house within 30 days and pay me over $20,000 for damages and legal fees. On top of that, he was sentenced to a year in jail for the forgery. Watching him get handcuffed in the courtroom was a strange mix of satisfaction and disappointment. I couldn't believe someone I'd trusted could stoop so low. Jeremy's family moved away soon after, probably too embarrassed to stay in the neighborhood. With the money from the lawsuit, I repaired the damage he'd caused and even added a security system to the property. I still feel a pang of anger whenever I think about those months of stress, but I also feel proud for standing my ground. The farm is mine, just like it always was, and now it's safe from anyone who thinks they can take what doesn't belong to them. Before the next story, I would like to ask you to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Let's move on to the next story. I landed a job at a small company, which I'll call Firm Y. It was during my gap year before starting college. The place was run by a husband and wife duo, Rick and Dana, who worked alongside their son, Jason. It was a tight-knit operation, and they made a big deal about treating their employees like part of the family. At first, everything seemed great. The atmosphere was casual, my coworkers were friendly, and I enjoyed the routine. Things stayed smooth for a couple of months until I found out that a band I absolutely loved was performing their final concert in our country. I wasn't going to miss it for anything. Knowing how much the event meant to me, I decided to request the day off well in advance, over a month before the concert. Figuring that giving them plenty of notice would make it a straightforward process, I sent an email to Dana, explaining the situation and asking for the day. Her response was strange. She didn't outright deny my request, but she did say, "That's not how asking for time off works." I didn't know what she meant by that. Was the email too casual? Did they need a formal request? Determined to fix whatever the issue was, I wrote a more polished and professional email, laying out the same request in clearer terms. Dana's reply to this one confused me even more. She told me I needed to think carefully about what I was doing. It sounded cryptic and almost like a warning, yet she still didn't say no. I tried to remain hopeful that maybe I was just misreading the situation. Surely they wouldn't be unreasonable about such a simple request, especially with so much notice. The next workday, I came in as usual. I parked my bike, grabbed my things, and headed inside, still trying to figure out what Dana's emails meant. Before I could even settle in, Rick walked up to me looking serious. Without any small talk, he asked, "Do you still want to go to that concert?" His bluntness caught me off guard. Without thinking too much about it, I nodded and said, "Yes." That's when he dropped the bombshell. "All right. Take off your uniform and go home." For a moment, I stood there, completely stunned. His words didn't make sense to me. I stared at him, trying to process what had just happened, and then glanced at my coworkers, who were busy setting up for the day. When it finally hit me that he was firing me for asking for a day off, I felt a surge of anger. I'm not the type of person who handles confrontation well, so I didn't make a scene. Instead, I quietly removed my uniform vest, handed it to Rick, and walked out the door. As I rode my bike home, my thoughts were racing. The anger I had managed to suppress while leaving work started bubbling up. How could they treat me like this? All I had done was ask for a single day off for something I was passionate about. It wasn't like I was unreliable or hadn't given them enough notice. The whole situation felt unfair and surreal. When I got home, I told my mom everything. She was as shocked as I was. "That doesn't sound right," she said, frowning. "They can't just fire you for asking for a day off." Together, we decided to dig deeper. We started by drafting an email to Dana, requesting clarification on what exactly had led to my sudden dismissal. Her responses were, unsurprisingly, vague and dismissive. Each reply she sent was laced with condescension, as if she was doing me a favor by even responding. After going back and forth with her a few times, I realized we weren't going to get any real answers. That's when I decided to look up the labor laws in our country regarding immediate termination. As I pored over the legal documents online, I discovered something interesting. In our jurisdiction, an employee could only be fired on the spot for a few specific reasons, such as theft, fraud, incompetence, or outright refusal to work. None of these applied to me. I had been doing my job diligently, and I hadn't refused any tasks. There was no legitimate reason for what they had done. Armed with this information, I knew I had to take action. The next day, I met with a lawyer to discuss my situation. After hearing my story, he assured me that I had a strong case. "This kind of behavior isn't just unethical, it's illegal," he said confidently. That reassurance gave me the push I needed to move forward. Over the following weeks, my lawyer and I worked together to build my case. I provided him with copies of all the emails exchanged between Dana and me, as well as a detailed account of what happened on the day I was fired. My lawyer was meticulous, ensuring that every detail was documented and every piece of evidence was in order. Meanwhile, Dana continued to respond to my emails with the same dismissive tone, which only strengthened my resolve to see this through. Finally, the day of the hearing arrived. It was a small claims court, so it wasn't as intimidating as a big courtroom, but I still felt nervous. I dressed in a suit to make a good impression and brought all my evidence, along with my lawyer, who was ready to argue my case. When Dana walked into the room, I was surprised to see that she had come alone. No lawyer, no support, just her. At first, she seemed confident, even smug. I guessed she thought she didn't need help because she believed she was in the right. But as the proceedings began and the judge reviewed the evidence, her demeanor started to shift. My lawyer presented our case calmly and professionally, laying out the facts and referencing the labor laws that had clearly been violated. Dana tried to defend herself, but her arguments were weak and unconvincing. Halfway through the hearing, she seemed to realize the tide was turning against her. That's when her professionalism completely unraveled. Instead of sticking to the facts, she started making personal attacks, calling me entitled and spoiled. She even tried to argue that I didn't deserve the job in the first place, which was not only irrelevant but also a poor reflection on her as an employer. The judge wasn't impressed. He quickly shut down her ranting and reminded her that the case was about her actions, not my character. By the end of the hearing, it was clear where things were heading. The judge ruled in my favor, citing the lack of any valid reason for my dismissal and the unprofessional behavior displayed by Dana during the proceedings. Though the judge had ruled in my favor, I knew the process wasn't quite over. In small claims cases like this, it usually took about a month to receive the official written verdict. So, I waited. The initial rush of satisfaction from the ruling slowly gave way to impatience as the days dragged on. I just wanted closure, something tangible to prove that I had been right all along. When the verdict finally arrived in the mail, I felt a sense of relief wash over me. There it was in black and white, Firm Y had acted unlawfully by terminating me without just cause, and they were ordered to pay me 6 months' worth of wages as compensation. 6 months. It was more than I had even hoped for. Knowing Dana, I expected her to appeal the decision or delay payment, but surprisingly, the money arrived in my account just a couple of weeks later. I guess even she realized there was no point in dragging things out further. The payout was significant, and for someone my age, it felt like a windfall. I couldn't help but laugh at the irony of the situation. What started as a single day off to attend a concert had turned into a half-year's worth of income without having to work another day at Firm Y. Justice, it seemed, could be both satisfying and profitable. Of course, the real highlight of the whole ordeal was still the concert itself. Despite everything, I had managed to attend the event I'd been so excited about. The energy in the venue was electric, and the band delivered a performance that I'll never forget. Every note, every lyric felt like a victory anthem after everything I'd gone through to be there. It wasn't just a concert. It was a celebration of standing up for myself and refusing to let anyone take advantage of me. Reflecting on the entire experience, I realized it taught me more than I initially understood. Before this, I had always been the type to avoid conflict, to keep my head down and go along with what others wanted. But this situation forced me to stand my ground and advocate for myself. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. I learned that no one, not even an employer, has the right to treat you unfairly. If you don't fight for yourself, no one else will. After the dust settled, I moved on with my life, but I couldn't help but wonder how Firm Y was doing. I occasionally heard rumors from old coworkers who told me things weren't going great for them. Apparently, Dana's attitude had driven away several more employees, and they were struggling to keep the business running. Part of me felt a little vindicated hearing that, though I tried not to dwell on it too much. At the end of the day, I had won my battle, and that was enough. What started as a frustrating and seemingly insignificant conflict became a defining moment in my life. It wasn't just about the concert or even the money. It was about learning to value myself and my rights. And while the experience was challenging, I wouldn't trade the lessons I learned for anything. The next story. When I was working as an independent consultant in IT, I landed a subcontracting gig with a major consulting firm. I'll call them Summit Dynamics. There was another independent consultant brought on as well, and the two of us were embedded in a larger team made up entirely of Summit employees. The arrangement was clear. The client wasn't supposed to know we were outside hires. Of course, that plan didn't last long. The client figured it out pretty quickly because we, the independents, were the ones doing the bulk of the actual work. Meanwhile, Summit's salaried consultants spent their time managing spreadsheets and attending endless team-building exercises. But that's another story. The project's initial deadline came and went, and my contract expired. Still, I agreed to stay on a week-to-week basis to help wrap things up. It wasn't out of loyalty to Summit. I barely tolerated their team, but I liked the client. Things were running smoothly enough, but then Summit pulled the rug out from under us. The original project manager, who at least knew the ropes, was reassigned to another contract, and his replacement showed up Monday morning like a storm cloud. Enter Mark Steele, or, as I came to think of him, Mark Stress. Mark wasted no time establishing his dominance. The moment he walked into the office, he started throwing his weight around. His tone was sharp, his criticisms relentless, and he barked orders like a drill sergeant. It was clear his approach was less about managing and more about posturing. Most of the team gritted their teeth and kept their heads down. I, on the other hand, was not built to take this kind of nonsense quietly. That first morning I was at my makeshift desk, really just a folding table crammed into a tiny shared office space with 3 other team members. I was focused on my work, tuning out the muffled sound of Mark's voice coming from the main room. Then, the door slammed open, and there he was, filling the doorway with a sneer already locked in place. "How are we handling the payroll conversion task?" he demanded, arms crossed like he'd just caught us stealing office supplies. "We're using FlowLogic," I replied, keeping my voice even. FlowLogic was a custom program I'd developed specifically for this project. Mark snorted and waved his hand dismissively. "FlowLogic? That's ridiculous. It'll never work. You need to do something else." The room went silent. The other independent consultant, Emma, was sitting nearby, and she shot me a warning glance. Later, she told me she thought I was going to leap across the desk. She wasn't entirely wrong. My blood was boiling because, quite frankly, Mark had no idea what he was talking about. Not only had I written FlowLogic from scratch, but it was already proving to be a rock-solid solution for the project. Mark didn't know the first thing about the program or its capabilities. He was just bluffing to assert control. Instead of taking the bait, I leaned back in my chair and gave him a measured look. "If you want to suggest an alternative, go ahead. But FlowLogic is already implemented and running. It works." Mark didn't have a rebuttal. He huffed, muttered something under his breath, and stormed out of the room. That's when I decided I was done. After Mark's little performance, I knew I couldn't work with him. Life's too short to deal with someone who leads by bluster and ego. The decision was easy for me. I wasn't even under contract anymore. I'd been staying on purely out of goodwill to help the client cross the finish line. But goodwill has its limits. I decided to address the situation head on. So I went to speak with the client's payroll manager, Lisa Carter. She and I had worked closely over the past several months, and I knew she respected the work I'd put in. If anyone could understand where I was coming from, it was her. I knocked on her office door, and she waved me in with a smile. "What's up?" she asked, glancing up from her computer. I didn't waste time. "Lisa, I need to talk to you about something important. You know I'm not a Summit employee, right? I'm here on an independent contract." Lisa nodded, her expression calm. "Yeah, I'm aware." "Well," I continued, "that contract officially expired a while ago. I've been sticking around on a week-to-week basis to help finish the project because I care about making sure this goes smoothly for you and your team. But after today, I'm not sure I can keep doing that." Her brow furrowed. "What happened?" I took a deep breath and laid it out plainly. "This new project manager, Mark, he's a problem. He came in today barking orders, belittling people, and dismissing the work we've already done without even understanding it. I can't work under someone like that. If he's staying, I'm leaving." Lisa leaned back in her chair, considering my words. She wasn't the kind of person to rush decisions, but I could see the gears turning. "I appreciate you telling me this," she said after a moment. "Let me think about how to handle it." That was all I needed to say. I didn't demand anything or make threats. I just wanted her to understand that my involvement was contingent on not having to deal with Mark's antics. I left her office feeling a strange mix of relief and uncertainty. I'd done my part, but I had no idea what would happen next. 2 hours later, I got my answer. Lisa called me back to her office, and the look on her face told me she'd been busy. "I wanted you to know I've spoken to Summit," she said. "Mark's being reassigned, effective immediately." I blinked, surprised at how quickly things had escalated. "That was fast." Lisa smiled faintly. "It wasn't a hard decision. You're the one holding this project together, and I wasn't about to lose you over someone who's been here less than a day." Apparently, Lisa had picked up the phone and delivered a clear ultimatum to Summit. Either Mark goes, or we lose the only person who actually understands this payroll system. Summit, not wanting to jeopardize their relationship with the client, scrambled to make it happen. They rearranged schedules and pulled strings to keep the original project manager, Dan Harris, on the project instead of moving him to his next assignment. Dan wasn't perfect, but he was at least competent and respectful. Two things Mark clearly wasn't. The irony of the situation hit me later that evening when I learned Summit had already planned a welcome dinner for Mark at a fancy steakhouse. Rather than cancel it, they turned it into a farewell dinner. Less than 1 day on the job, and he was already out the door. From what I heard, the dinner was an awkward affair, with Mark trying to maintain a shred of dignity while everyone else politely avoided talking about his abrupt departure. As for me, I stayed on to finish the project. With Mark gone and Dan back in charge, the atmosphere improved significantly. The team pulled together, the work got done, and the client's payroll system went live without a hitch. The fallout from Mark's short-lived tenure didn't just disappear overnight, though. The team was still buzzing about his bizarre behavior and abrupt removal. I tried to steer clear of the gossip, but it was impossible not to hear snippets as I worked. Some of the Summit employees were clearly embarrassed by the situation, and honestly, I didn't blame them. Mark's attitude had made all of us look bad, but especially them, since he was their representative. Dan, the original project manager, handled his unexpected return with a professionalism I appreciated. When he walked back into the office the next day, there was no grand announcement or dramatic entrance. Just a simple, "Let's get back to work." He immediately set about catching up on what he'd missed during his brief absence. To his credit, he didn't ask a single question about Mark or the chaos of the previous day. It was as if he instinctively knew that none of us wanted to revisit it. With Dan back at the helm, things quickly returned to a more productive rhythm. He trusted me and the other independent consultant, Emma, to handle the technical aspects of the project without micromanaging. That trust was a stark contrast to Mark's approach, and it reminded me why I'd agreed to extend my involvement in the first place. I respected Dan's leadership, and I could see that he genuinely wanted the project to succeed. Still, there were some lingering challenges to address. Mark had managed to stir up a surprising amount of confusion in the few hours he was in charge. He'd made sweeping declarations about the work being done, calling certain processes into question, and even suggesting changes that, thankfully, never had the chance to be implemented. His interference had rattled a few people on the team, and I found myself spending extra time reassuring them that everything was on track. One of the Summit employees, a junior developer named Ethan, seemed particularly shaken. Ethan had been assigned to assist me with the payroll system, and while he wasn't the most experienced coder, he was eager to learn. Unfortunately, Mark's condescending attitude had left him doubting his abilities. "Hey," I said one afternoon, catching Ethan staring blankly at his monitor. "You good?" He hesitated, then shrugged. I don't know. I feel like maybe I'm not cut out for this. Mark said some stuff yesterday that's been stuck in my head. He made it sound like everything I've been working on is pointless. I sighed, already regretting that Mark had been allowed to step foot in the office. Ethan, let me tell you something. Mark didn't know what he was talking about. I don't mean that as an insult. It's just a fact. He didn't understand this project or the tools we're using. And that's on him, not you. Ethan still looked uncertain, so I continued. You've been doing good work. I've seen it. And trust me, if there was a problem, I'd let you know, not to tear you down, but to help you improve. That's how teams are supposed to work. He nodded slowly, and I could see a flicker of confidence returning. Thanks, he said quietly. I appreciate that. Moments like that reinforced my decision to stay on. While the project had been frustrating at times, there were also rewarding aspects, like seeing someone like Ethan grow and develop his skills. It reminded me why I enjoyed consulting in the first place. Sure, the work itself was important, but so was the opportunity to mentor others and contribute to a team's success. As the weeks went by, the project moved steadily toward completion. There were the usual last-minute challenges, unexpected bugs, minor miscommunications, and the occasional fire drill, but nothing we couldn't handle. The client's payroll manager, Lisa, continued to be a steady presence, offering support and keeping the team motivated. She and I developed a strong professional rapport, and I came to appreciate her no-nonsense approach to problem-solving. Eventually, the day arrived when the new payroll system went live. It was a nerve-wracking moment for everyone involved. Months of work had led to this, and there was no room for error. But when the system launched without a hitch, the sense of relief and accomplishment was palpable. The client's team was thrilled, and even the Summit employees seemed genuinely proud of what we'd achieved. As for me, I walked away from the project with a mix of satisfaction and exhaustion. It hadn't been an easy ride, but it was worth it to see the final result. Lisa thanked me personally for sticking with it, and even Dan pulled me aside to express his gratitude. In the end, I learned a lot from the experience, not just about navigating complex projects, but also about the importance of standing up for yourself and your work. Mark had come in like a wrecking ball, but he was gone as quickly as he arrived. And while his time on the project may have been short, the lessons I took from dealing with him would stick with me for much longer. Thank you for watching.